Sales conversations where both buyers and sellers win are rare and plagued by the cringe. We've all felt it. It's that sinking feeling that both buyer and seller get when the conversation is going off the rails. My name is Adam Clay. I'm the CEO of Rainmakers. I've spent 25 years building and leading global sales organizations and thinking about the sales conversation. At the Cringe, we put the sales conversation under the microscope and explore pathways to ensuring that sales reps, leaders, and managers conduct great sales conversations. Today, my guest is Damian Saunders, Chief Revenue Officer of Cambridge Spark. Damian, welcome to the show.
Adam, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. So I'm a big fan of the series.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So tell us a little bit about Cambridge Spark and the kinds of conversations you have.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd love to. So, we live in a world that's looking at technology and data in a very different way. It's a kind of once in a generational shift, and there's this wave of companies now that are emerging where the world is almost too interesting for them not to exist. So Cambridge Spark is a technology education innovator. We work in the area of data and AI for leading companies who not only want to take their existing workforce and reskill them, but want to become a destination point for folks in their early careers who want to build up their capabilities in this kind of new world of tech. So, we're getting into conversations about everything from taking an existing workforce and making them more data literate, through to working with senior executives in organizations that want to become innovators in the world of data. So from a sales conversation perspective, I think it's this combination of being connected to strategic imperatives in these larger companies, as well as having this focus on the investment in people that give us access to the C-suite like nothing else I've worked with before, which in itself means that when we're there, we don't want to screw it up.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you. So I know from having worked together and being familiar with your background that you've worked for companies big and small, companies that sell to large enterprises through long sales cycles to companies that operate at a much higher velocity, selling to end users at a more transactional pace. So Damian, we start all conversations on this show with the same question. In a sales conversation, what makes you cringe?
So I can give you an example. I can give you an example of something that drives me crazy, that you hear all the time. You probably do it. I still can't stop myself from doing it. But every time I hear it, my brain balls in my head and I want to die. And it's this. Imagine that you're in a sales call and you're running a presentation or a demo, and you realize that you've just gone a little long, and maybe the audience might be in danger of losing them. They could be tuning out. So you just want to do that basic courtesy of stopping and starting to get the conversation going again. And a common way of doing it is to say, look, at this point, I just want to pause and I want to see if you have any questions. Do you have any questions? Right? You're familiar with that scenario? It sounds familiar to you?
I have to say I'm occasionally guilty of it myself, and I've seen it before. So why does that make you cringe?
It's the silent killer, and it makes me of the sales conversation, and it makes me cringe because a couple of things. First of all, that's a closed question. And there are only one of two possible ways in which it can be answered. And one of them is, yes, I have questions, but that means I've got to get my system-driven mind going. I've got to assemble those questions might be. I will think about what I want to say to you. And most people's minds are lazy. And our heuristic response in most sales calls, particularly if you're in the process of kind of tuning out, you may not be paying attention for the last 30 seconds is to say no.
No.
No, I don't have any questions. As you were, carry on. And, we've missed an opportunity to say something different. We could have said something different. I think the habit of pausing the conversation and bringing the buyer back in is a good one. But if we make the mistake of asking a closed question, of not thinking of a smart question that we could have asked there, that gets the brain working and gets the buyer into a conversation with us, then we've committed a cardinal sin, and it drives me nuts whenever I hear that said.
Well, I like that. So that's a new piece of insight shared. We've not heard that before on the show, and I have to say that when the response is no, as it often is, it does send the salesperson or the sales team in the room or in that call sort of scrambling, because you have to recover from what is generally sort of a deflating moment. But I would argue that the seeds of your own deflation were planted in the question. I'd love to role play the alternative, as we do at the end of the show. So let's circle back. So let's shift gears. I know that you, as a sales and revenue leader, have been involved in a fair number of, dare I say, sales transformations, meaning you're joining organizations and part of your remit is to transform the sales team, the sales culture, and as a function of that, the type of sales conversation salespeople are expected to have with the market. So let's hear your take on some of the key components of undertaking a sales transformation when you move an organization from one state, one type of conversation to another.
So commonly when you encounter something like that, what is happening is the company has grown to a point where it needs to scale. And at that point in its evolution, there's typically something that you would find. You and I have both done this coming into upscale, high growth, high velocity sales organizations, is that the existing team and the existing sales leaders are all of a type. And some of the best salespeople I've ever encountered in my career can be found in small companies. These original sellers, the original crew that figured out how to go to market and figured out how to have effective sales conversations with the buyer. And they are like craftsmen. They're like sort of artisans of a trade. Like they've had so many iterations, so much practice in having these conversations that they are magnificent. But they become the first line of leaders as the business starts to grow. And then that brings with it a unique challenge, because these are people who are tasked with building a performance culture, as you would expect in any sales organization, where you've got to build a team of 10, 20, 30 people quickly, and you've got to keep pace with the growth of the company. So if you are one of those artisanal sellers that you've learned your craft, then you've got to think about and if it took me 2 or 3 years to do that, then how do I get a group of 10 or 20 salespeople that I've just hired to become effective in 8 to 10 weeks? Because that's typically the ramp time at which you want them to become proficient. So the challenge that lots of people like you and I have when they go into organizations like that is that there are a group of people around you that are responsible for creating this performance culture, and to equip a group of salespeople to go out there and have effective and structured sales conversations, because that is the only way to do it, who themselves have a different belief system. And the trick is to take everything that we know that makes us successful as experienced leaders with lots of exposure and practice to conversations, to ourselves, change our belief system so that we can do what we're asking others to do. Do you know what I mean? And it's one of the fundamental aspects of leadership is let them see you do it. Now, I know that I could take a 2 or 3 year veteran in a high growth software company and I could put them in front of any customer, they would be incredible. But if they're going along with one of their new reps and the new rep sees them do that, that's a soul crushing experience. That I'm gonna watch that as the new rep. I'm gonna watch that sales leader perform in front of a customer and think that is a superhuman quality. That I cannot go into my next sales call and do what I just saw that person do. However, if that, as experienced as they may be, and as much of an expert in the subject matter as they may be, if that sales leader takes that new addition to their sales team, goes out into a real world sales call and delivers a structured conversation that can easily be replicated, that generates good results, different results, but good results as a consequence of that discussion, that as the new intake into the sales team, I'm thinking, I could do that. I could go out and give me 3 or 4 shots at it, and I reckon I can become pretty good at doing exactly what I've just seen my sales leader do. I'm coming out with that kind of sense of confidence that this is something I can master quickly.
All right. Thank you for that. So a lot to talk about. Let me take them one at a time and double click on a couple of topics. So you talked about the underlying belief system as a critical component of undertaking a transformation, helping an organization go from one conversation to another in the context of our show. Tell us a little bit more about that. Like, what would an example of a belief system be that would then need to change, in the leaders, in the salespeople who may have been there for a while? Tell us about that.
A performance culture is no different to any other type of culture. It exists in 3 levels. And this, I think, is one of the popular misconceptions, is that it's a singular thing, but it's not. A culture is 3 things. And a culture is the articles and artifacts. And an example of that will be the selling methodology, the sales methodology that you put in place, and the planning documents and the processes that you build. The second level is the rites and rituals, the norms and values of running a performance-based organization. So that would be the recognition and rewards, the financial incentives that you would give salespeople. And that's typically where the story ends, just at those 2 levels. And then what happens next, right? Is that the experienced leaders in the sales organization just go with their belief system, what they know and trust. And then you have that scenario that I described to you, where you have the veteran salespeople doing one thing and the new intakes kind of struggling to try and find their own way. And then everything else that you've got on top of that, the kind of the normal practices and those artifacts that sales methodology and the selling system put in place. What tends to happen then is that the sales leadership team only bring it out on special occasions. Do you know what I mean? It's like the sales methodology is kept in a reliquary that is only brought out ceremoniously for things like pipeline reviews and QBRs and that type of thing. It's not something that has become embedded into the belief system of everyone in the organization, simply because the leadership team themselves are not believers of it. So it falls on the veteran salespeople, it falls on the sales leaders to unfreeze their belief systems which are founded on good principles. Like, as I say, they're not wrong, but they are very effective at what they do. But they have to unfreeze that belief and then embrace the structured sales conversation that they want everyone else to exhibit. Do it themselves. Let the sales team see them do it, and then that's when it becomes that shared belief system, that fundamental foundational part of any performance culture. And then once that becomes a muscular reflex, just the way in which everybody in the organization would go into any conversation with a customer and behave, then everything else makes sense. Then suddenly all the norms and values, all of the methodologies, all of the systems for review that you have become just a natural part of how the business operates and performs.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. So you've taken us through, what you believe are sort of the key ingredients of a high performing sales culture. And if I understood you correctly, the bedrock that underpins everything, without which no transformation is possible, is going to be the belief system. So let's take it to an example of what a prior and post belief system might look like for the audience who might not be as sort of familiar with these topics as you are. What's an example of a belief system before and a belief system after that has been asked to change for the betterment of everybody's performance?
So I think you'd recognize it instantly as being that dual standard. So that there is, so you don't have it. It's a lot easier to see these days because we have conversational intelligence tools. So we're able to, look at how everybody is having conversations with buyers, at least if it's happening in a Zoom call or it's happening in a video conferencing format, so it can be captured. Then you'll see that your standard. You'll see the experienced, accomplished sellers in the organizations, the sales leaders, who are those natural, who are natural at having conversations that kind of get deep into the capabilities of the product and the world of the buyer and the technology. And I'd to give you an example of what good looks like, I'm going to borrow a tip from the world of drug dealers who say you should never get high on your own supply, right? There is a danger in becoming high on your own supply, and that is what happens, I think, when you become like too ingrained in the world of the tech and the product. And as fascinating and as meaningful and as rewarding to the buyer as those conversations may be, they just draw us away from what is important. And what is interesting is, there have been occasions I've seen where highly experienced veteran product sellers get engaged with customers and then actually really struggle to manage sales cycles when it comes to things like calling a forecast and defeating an aggressive competitor because they just don't have the right command of sale. Like they've established credibility and trust and rapport with the buyer, but have simply forgotten one or two or just omitted one or two of the fundamentally important things about having a sales conversation. And then the flip side is that if you're not high on the supply and you have that sort of clarity of purpose, which is I'm going into a sales conversation, there are these 5 things that I need to establish. I need to establish basic credibility and trust, which I can do simply by proving that I'm good at my job. I need to diagnose the need, and then the obvious questions, which is how does your organization buy something like this? Who might feel left out if they were not part of this conversation? And so these are basic conversational structures that even a relative novice who is not familiar with the subject matter can still be an empathetic listener and give the prospect a good experience and come away with command of sale, knowledge of the buyer's universe, and effectively give the buyer a good experience and carry out their tasks as a sales professional well, in the absence of any sort of deep experience.
I think that's a very powerful insight. And, over the course of episodes of the Cringe today, it's not one that we heard. So I want to spend even more time on this because there's some nuance here. So let me take a shot at just restating what I heard. So most organizations, particularly when they're a bit more youthful, or perhaps even large organizations that haven't revisited the topic of how they have a sales conversation in a while, they find themselves, and it's not good or bad, and it's not right or wrong, dependent upon sellers who have achieved almost a magical or mystical, and very well could be effective blend of product knowledge, technical knowledge, market knowledge, and understanding of what's on the mind of the customer. You refer to them as artisanal salespeople, and they might be the top reps in the company. Your point is when it comes to transformation, particularly when accompanied by scale, that's a very difficult thing to replicate. And so it would be tempting for organizations to just replicate what's working in the hands of highly skilled artisanal sellers. But that's going to be virtually impossible to do. And so your recipe is to create a structured conversation that would allow perhaps less experienced people, certainly less experienced in that organization, if not less experienced outright, to be as effective by doing some things that you believe in, which is having a conversation, asking questions, understanding the buyer's perspective, where they are on their journey, what's important to them. And as something that is more scalable, I think we can all agree that that's more scalable. But to tie it back to this notion of a belief system, you also have to believe that this new way of doing things in the context of a transformation is actually the right thing to do. And I think what you're putting your finger on is that people might give attention to that belief, but they might not actually internalize it. And that's often seen in sales managers who have been around the organization for a while, the artisanal sellers themselves who have been very successful in the organization. And it's that friction that's going to make a transformation in the way sellers have conversations from craft to scalable more difficult. Now, that is a very long-winded recap, but I think it's such an important point. What can you add to that?
You've made me think of a couple of things, and one of them is that, of course, this isn't something that is unique just to young growth phase companies. I'll give you an example of where you would see it actually in established companies, and it's this: it's when you bring out a new product. It's when you change the environment so that even the veteran sellers find that the conversations that they've learned to craft over those many iterations over several years don't work anymore, because you're now selling a security product, or you're now selling a product that is only relevant to the VP of software development in this stuff, or whatever it may be. Suddenly the scenarios change. And then you'll be familiar with this, because I think we've seen it lots and lots of times, that the new product really struggles to embed. It really struggles to embed. And what is happening is the sales team, who have been used to framing the conversation around their areas of expertise, and that's how they add value to the buyer, are suddenly finding that technique isn't working anymore. So it takes a long time. That practice, it takes a long time for them to then recraft the conversation around something that they're familiar with, that they can start to kind of find a way of making this new product work. Whereas again, if you just had that structured conversation, if you just had the basics we were talking about earlier, that should form the backbone of any good sales call, then even if you took a brand new product and put it straight out there, as long as you know roughly what it is, the problem that it solves for your buyer, then you can use those techniques to probe for pain and identify what the potential opportunity might be from the buyer's side to qualify in or out. That's what we're there to do at the end of the day. Secondly, if it helps you any, I can draw from my own personal experience, because I spent the first half of my career in enterprise sales, building up value propositions over sales cycles that lasted years in some cases. And then you and I, our paths collided when we were both working in a fast growth mid-sized software company, and my belief systems were all built around this ability to build up rapport and trust and credibility over many meetings and interactions with the buyer. And then suddenly it's reduced down to that kind of real estate that I get. The exposure to the buyer that I had is much smaller, And, not only do I need to do all of my selling within that just 2 or 3 meetings, but I also have to do my job as a salesperson. So I have to qualify. I have to understand the buyer's needs. I have to understand the buyer's process. I need to understand timescales. I need to move the goalpost to a point where the competition can't score against me. So I need to do my job as a competitive salesperson. But I had to do all of that in like 2 Zoom calls. So I don't have the opportunity to build up that credibility, the basis of credibility and trust. I just have to show up and be good at my job. And it took me a long time to change my own belief system so that I could sell that way. But once I myself realized what that was able to do for me, but more importantly, when I realized what it empowered me to do with my people. So as a 20-year veteran of business to business sales, actually just go out and have a simple structured sales conversation and let my sales team do it. That for me was like discovering some kind of steroid, like some kind of performance enhancing drug that allowed me to outperform others, but it was legal. I'm not breaking any laws doing it.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So let's talk a little bit about how organizations might absorb new products into the sales team. And so you said something there that put me in mind of something I think that many people who listen to this show will recognize. Very often, marketing teams or enablement teams will introduce products in a way that might be defined as classical, standard narrative associated with the new offering, right? I'm an insurance company and here's a new line. I'm a software company. Here's a new product. I'm an automotive company. Here's a new car. And the way it's deployed is going to be very heavy on product features, product benefits, how this stuff stacks up against the competition. And there is a temptation, I think, that a classic new product deployment creates with sales organizations that sort of brings them backward. And that is, now it's my job just to talk about this new product. And don't you think that when new product is introduced, it's got to be done in a way that is mindful of the types of conversations the sales team is actually being asked to have by their revenue leaders, by their sales managers, which is to say, if I do a product and a feature and a benefit and a competitive analysis dump onto the sales team, now it's on them to understand how they might weave that into a conversation through the use of statements designed to help the buyer understand how other buyers have been helped, through provocative questions, for example, that might reveal for the buyer ideas about how this new product might be used. That seems to still be a little broken. Am I right about that, or am I just out of touch with the way things are done today?
Not at all. And I've encountered, unfortunately, exactly what you're describing, and it's a funny issue, because what tends to happen is the heads of product management, the heads of product marketing, in anticipation of bringing the product to market, that classic kind of ready, aim, fire that happens before you launch, normally turn up to the conversation with the sales team with all of this beautiful stuff that they've built. And it's a 20-slide deck that describes the gap in the market that we've identified, how we want to talk about all the things that are exciting. And the sales team themselves are getting pretty jazzed about it, because usually when you bring a new product to market, you're thinking, that's what my buyers want, and I can't wait to tell them all about it. And it takes great restraint to try and sort of tamper all this stuff down, so you can still sort of do your job as a salesperson. So just in this last year, the same situation played out. and I'm sitting with the VP of product marketing, and he's saying to me, like, here is all of these incredible messages and stories that we want to get out in front of the buyer, and we've had to find a way of stitching it into the structured conversations that we would always and still want to have. And what it came down to at the end was reaching a compromise in which I said there's only really one place in any discovery call where a new product would live. And it's in the solution definition, and it's in the differentiator probes that you would use. I'll give you an example. So if it's an innovation, or if it's a new idea, which often it is, that you want to bring to your buyer, you'd say something like this, which is, okay, well, you've described in your own words what it is that you're looking for. However, I couldn't help noticing that there are a couple of things you didn't mention that are commonly occurring in other conversations with professionals in your kind of role that I'm having. And I just want to share that insight with you, and you tell me whether or not this is something that also doesn't resonate. And of course, then what you're doing is doing that basic feature benefit pitch, which is all you really need for that new product. So the buyer then is thinking, what's that you're saying? What are other people? What's going on out there? What's the buzz I'm missing? And what you're diving into is the number one reason why any buyer would see a salesperson in the first place, which is that they might learn something they didn't already know. They know that salespeople are ultimately gossips. We spend our time. If your buyer is the chief technology officer, as a salesperson, you'll be talking to chief technology officers 3 or 4 times a day. But when you are a chief technology officer, you don't talk to chief technology officers except if you're at a trade show or a conference or something of that sort. So along comes Adam, and Adam's talking to 4 or 5 chief technology officers a day, and I want to know what's the buzz. What are other people doing? What is the latest idea that I may not be aware of? And that's what we're tapping into with that conversation about our new product. We're just ever so subtly just suggesting that there is a new big idea out there that, of course, our product is there that's the problem that we want to fix. But that's how we do it. And so it does take a lot of restraint not to go in gung ho and say, I've got this thing, you're gonna love it. And instead just feel out whether or not the problem that you're solving with that new product is present in the buyer. And if it is, then they're going to tell you that they want it. But that's that kind of classic example of how maintaining discipline in the conversational structure will allow you to sell your new product.
That's very well said. And I'm thinking about many of the revenue leaders and enablement or learning and development leaders, and occasionally marketing leaders that in my role I get to talk to every day. And it's remarkable how much sales transformation is underway at the conversational level. And I think what this discussion is revealing, and it's a cool pearl of wisdom, I think, mined out from your experience in undertaking this, probably 4 or 5 times with different organizations, is that the belief system the sales organization needs to have about what constitutes a good sales conversation, why you're going to have it, needs to be equivalently believed in by the groups that are going to support the sales organization: marketing, product, learning and development. And that's hard. If there's not good alignment there, then the salespeople themselves will be required to interpret what's been given to them in terms of a new product, a new service, or a new capability in a way that's useful for them. And that'll happen over time, but it could be done so much better, more efficiently, and much faster. So, Damien, I want to come back to something that I had mentioned when I introduced you to listeners, and it has to do with your background. You've worked for big companies and you've worked for small companies. You've worked for companies that sell complex enterprise solutions to sophisticated enterprise buyers, and you've sold solutions that are purchased closer to the end user level, if not at the end user level. And there's a temptation, I think, to assume that structure is important when you're talking about complex sales cycles, but a little less important conversationally when you're dealing with buyers that may have had a chance to try out your software already, or buyers that are just looking to purchase something because they've used your software in a premium or PLG motion. And so this concept of meeting buyers where they are, giving them what they want because they're pretty far down the road already in the buying cycle in their own mind. They've tried your software, they've tested your software, they've been using it. But in order to get a deal done in a way that's good for the company, sometimes the seller has to sort of say, well, hold on, I just need a little bit more information. Like I've got to have a structured conversation here to make sure that my company understands a few things. And so your experience, I think, has put you into situations where you had to contend with the concept of really meeting buyers in a high velocity sales cycle where they are with a structured conversation. Can you talk a little bit about an example of how that came together in your recent or not too distant experience? It's a new topic here at the Cringe. Go ahead.
I think actually it's something, regardless of experience, we are all encountering now. And it's because the buyer in their decision-making process is now able to get so much of the information that they need in digital content that by the time they talk to the salesperson, there's only really a couple of things that they need to find out before they decide. And I'll say it another way, back in the days of traditional enterprise software sales, the buyer would arrive with the salesperson knowing very little. So therefore, the expectation of the buyer was, I need the salesperson to give me the show, right? I want the vision deck. I want the exciting demo. I want the solutions workshop. And those sort of things, in true enterprise sales cycles still happen today. But in the world of SaaS, that happens very rarely. And your buyer's been onto TrustRadius, onto G2 Crowd, onto Gartner Peer Insights. They've read your website. They've read the buyer's website. They've seen your interactive demo. And now in the possession of most of what they need to decide, they just want those last couple of things. And those last couple of things that they have to talk to the sales team about is usually price, right? And some kind of demo deep dive. So the challenge that gives the seller is, how do I deliver precisely those two things without the buyer believing that that's all I'm good for? Because if they come away from that meeting with me thinking that as a salesperson, all I'm good for is a demo at a price, I'm not going to get them on the phone again. I'm not going to be able to bring them back into a conversation with me because I haven't had the opportunity to add any value to them. I haven't had the opportunity to add any value. So to go back to your original question, and I know I've just restated the problem, but to get back to the question then of how, in light of that being common now, in particularly in SaaS sales, how do we still have a conversation with a buyer where we get to add value? And I think it's about those simple techniques that we can use in any structured sales call, which is just the permission to ask. Hey, I'd love to give you a price, but we've got a price on everything in our portfolio, and I'd love to give you a demo, but we've got 30 features, and I don't want to sit here, you're a nice guy, Adam. I'm not going to subject you to that level of torture. I'm not going to give you a sequential walkthrough of my product. I just want to find out what you're really about, and then I just want to show you, because if we can't have that dialogue, I don't know what to show you. So I think it just comes down, even on those really short Zoom calls, just ask a couple of smart questions, seek permission to ask, do those probes, find out, and then just take that opportunity to say, hey, there's a couple of things that we've just discussed in this short meeting that I would have expected us to get to that we didn't. And I don't want to go away before I've just shared with you the one or two things that I would commonly expect the conversation to take us towards. And that's those one or two killer features that you've got that you know set you aside from the competition, that you just want to lay that rope out there and see whether or not the buyer kind of pulls on, so you can draw even that short conversation into an area that makes you, special and unique. And in the process of doing that, give the buyer some valuable insight. Let them walk away because they came into the conversation thinking that they knew what the answer looked like based on all of that research that they have done. But you've just given them that one or two things to think about when they walk away, which means that when you need to talk to them again in another 10 days, or you agree that follow-up, they're like, yeah, I'll talk about it again. He re-engineered my vision a little, and I hope that helps you, Eddie, but that would be my approach.
That was very good and very insightful. I don't want to speak for the audience, but there are unquestionably some insights that I gleaned from what you just said. But let me just tear something apart quickly. So you said, I could just give a demo. I could just give a price, but I need to add some value. So there's a temptation, again, I think I've used that word a few times now, to say, well, for whose benefit am I going to add that value? Is that value for the buyer's benefit? Or is that value for the benefit of my manager who says, I got to ask these damn questions? And I'm deeply afraid that if I don't, I'm going to imperil my future at the organization. So it's rhetorical, but for people who might be newer to these ideas, it might not be as obvious. So for whose value would you veer from just giving a demo and giving a price? It's exactly what the buyers want in this example. For whose benefit are you creating value? Yours or the buyers, or both? In what order?
So for the buyer, it's always obligation before opportunity. So if a buyer has gifted us with 30 minutes of their attention span, and they've done it because they've come into the conversation with the basic assumption that we're going to be good at our job. So we're going to make that 30 minutes that they spend with us a worthwhile investment of time. We have an obligation to do precisely that. So that's the first of the two different types of value add that we want to get. The first thing is, let's add value to the buyer because we have an obligation that we've been given as a result of that reward of 30 minutes of their attention span. But you're right. We also have an obligation to the organization that requires us as a sales team to first and foremost make good use of the organization's resources, which is our people and our time. So we don't want to fill a sales pipeline full of rubbish because we don't know where to focus, where to start, where to prioritize. So of course, we need to qualify as well, and that's why the manager is asking us to do it. So, so the most important thing in that meeting is to give the buyer what they expect, because it's the obligation that we carry. But there is an opportunity, obviously, for us also to qualify the customer and put this opportunity into our pipeline in the CRM, but make sure that by doing that, we're just not creating chaff.
So Damien, I think by necessity, and in the fullness of the conversation that we're having about sales transformation, at any moment you might have a sales team that consists of people who were selling the old way and people who were selling the new way. Is that good? Is it bad? Sustainable or not?
So the only thing I would say is pick your course. They're both good. That experience-based artisanal selling, it has its place in the world, as does system-based selling. I think the only danger is when you try and conflate the two within a single sales organization, because it's confusing for the supporting functions. It's confusing for sales engineering. It's confusing for for field marketing. It's confusing for management when they don't understand how the sales team is operating. So the only advice would be choose a horse and back it.
I like that. Well said. So Damien, we're nearing the end of the episode, and as is a tradition here on the Cringe, we're gonna send you out with a role play, and I want to take everybody back to what you said in response to what makes you cringe in a conversation, and we talked about it at the very top of the show, and that is, after a presentation of capabilities or after a demonstration, the salesperson pauses and says, "Do you have any questions?" And we contended that the answer most of the time is going to be no, and that makes you cringe. And so for the role play, I thought it would be fun to hear, if not that at the end of a presentation capability overview or a demo, then what? And my guess is this will be a pretty quick role play as a consequence. So let's do it. I am a buyer at your disposal, and you're the presenting salesperson.
Yeah, you're right. Every time someone asks that question, I'm pretty certain somewhere a fairy dies. So let's stop that and give an example of what it should go like. So if you're the buyer and I have just done my killer feature demo, I'm going to pause. I'm going to say, Adam, I just want to pause and take a moment, and I'd like to know what feedback you have.
And role play. There it is.
So the smartest questions are the simplest ones. And, what is happening there is I haven't given you an opportunity to be lazy and say no. I'm giving you an opportunity to think, because you'd have to think in response to that question. It would be impossible to answer that question without taking a moment, getting your brain moving, and thinking of a response. You could, if you really wanted to give someone a hi-hat, say, I don't have any feedback for you. But it's less likely that they would do that. And it's more likely that they would just give you a flat no if you ask that first question. So it's one of those simple things, like really simple, as all smart questions are, that makes all the difference to how the sales conversation ends.
All right. Wonderful. Damien Saunders, Chief Revenue Officer of Cambridge Spark, thank you so much for joining us here on The Cringe. A great conversation, and I appreciate it.
It's been a blast. Thanks for having me.
If you've enjoyed listening, follow me, Adam Clay, on LinkedIn. I'm regularly sharing insight and tips on the art of sales and the sales conversation. This podcast is produced and presented by Rainmakers, where we believe the sales conversation is everything. Check us out online at rnmkrs.com.